All right, so what we're going to do today is finish up the 4 examples from yesterday. Remember, we were talking about sine and cosine graphs. What do we need to remember with a sine graph? Where does a sine graph start? Starts at 0. Good. Sine graph starts at 0. All right, we go from 0, and if it's positive, we go up, then back to 0, then down, then up, then back to like that. A cosine graph starts where? At the amplitude. Perfect. Starts at the amplitude, and then it goes to the x-axis, whether it be the positive or the negative. And then it just repeats the pattern. Everybody remember that? So let's talk about the things we need to find. You guys don't have to worry about phase shifts or vertical shifts up and down. We're not going to do those. So don't worry about the C and the D here. You'll see that in pre-cal. What you need to remember, what you need to identify is A is the amplitude. That's how high or low the graph goes. Whatever that number is, that's the amplitude. It's not negative, it's the absolute value of it. So if it's -7, that just means it goes up to 7 and down to -7. You need to take the B. And remember, what is the B? B is the number in front of X. And what do we do with that? To find the time period, it's one whole circle divided by the B. All right? You're going to have to identify 3 things: the amplitude, the time period, and then the increments. How do we find the increments? Anybody remember? You take the time period and do what? Divide by 4. Everything is based on the unit circle. So the period is 2 pi, one whole circle divided by the B value. Then you take that and you cut that into 4 pieces. You remember that? All right, so let's just do these 4 examples and then we are done. On your test, you're going to have to do this. You're going to have to identify those things that we just talked about and then graph it. So when I look at number 1, all right, I like to do a couple things. First of all, I like to say sine. Where do I start at? At 0. Remember that, okay? So when I draw my little graph, I'm going to graph it, and I have to identify a few things. I have to identify the amplitude, the time period, and the what? The increments, okay? Tell me what the amplitude is. 1/4. Perfect. It's 1/4. So the highest this graph is going to go is 1/4. The lowest it's going to go is -1/4. Everybody agree? Okay. So A is my 1/4. What's my B value? What's the number in front of X? 1. So my time period is 2 pi divided by my B value. So what's my time period? 2 pi. So I'm going to have the ending over here is at 2 pi. My beginning is at 0. Now I have to find those pieces in the middle. I find my increments. How do I find the increments? I take the time period, 2 pi, divided by what? 4, which equals pi over 2, 1/2. So every increment starting with 0, you just keep adding pi over 2. So this first one is pi over 2. What's my second increment? Pi over 2 plus pi over 2 is 2 pi over 2, right? Which is pi. Add another pi over 2. 3 pi over 2. And then I add another pi over 2, which gives me a whole circle. And now we graph it. Where do I start since it's a sine curve? Sine starts at 0. It's positive, so I go up. Then I come back down to the x-axis. Then I go down to the amplitude. Then I go back to the x-axis. And we connect our dots in a nice smooth curve. You always go axis, amplitude, axis, amplitude, axis, amplitude. The whole, and you just keep continuing that. Questions? All right, let's look at number 2. Number 2, I'm going to draw it a little. This is number 2. So I have, what is my A value? What's my amplitude? What's the number in front of the trig function? 1, good. What's your B value? What's your number in front of X? 2. Okay, we're going to use those 2 things. So my amplitude, your amplitude is 1. That means the graph, the highest it goes is +1, and the lowest it goes is -1. Anybody have any questions on that? Every time. Now we're going to find the time period. How do we find the time period? It's 2 pi divided by b. So 2 pi divided by 2 gives me what? Pi. All right, so it's going to start at 0 and end at pi. Is this going to go one whole circle? It's going to go what? Not a whole circle, it's what? Half, good. All right, so you find your increments. We take our time period and divide into how many pieces? 4, so pi over 4. So every tick mark is pi over 4 spaces away. So from 0, I add pi over 4, and I get pi over 4. Everybody agree with that? So my next tick mark, I'm going to add pi over 4, and I get 2 pi over 4. What's 2 pi over 4 the same as? Pi over 2. So I have another tick mark. I'm going to add pi over 4, and I get what? 3 pi over 4. Good. 3 pi over 4. Now think about it. If I went one more tick mark, I add another pi over 4. What does that give me? 4 pi over 4, which is the same as? Perfect. You just keep adding the same amount each time. So now I look at this and I go back and I say cosine. Where am I starting if it's a cosine graph? On the amplitude. Is it a positive one or a negative one? Positive, so I'm start up here. Then I'm at pi over 4, I'm at the x-axis. At pi over 2, I'm down at the negative amplitude. Then I'm back at the x-axis. Then I'm back at the positive amplitude. And you just draw your curve. How do we feel? It's not that bad. It appears a lot harder than it is. We'll do 2 more and then we'll be done. All right, number 3. I'm going to do number 3 down here so we have room. It's y equals, what is it? 2 sine of pi x. Okay, this is a little bit different. Nothing changes. 2 sine of pi x. First thing I look at is sine. Where am I going to start? At 0. Remind yourself. So what is your a value? What's the number in front of the trig function? 2. What is your b value? What's the number in front of x? Pi. Is pi a number? Yeah, 3.1415, whatever. It's fine. Just that's your number you're going to deal with. So let's talk about the 3 things we're going to find. Our amplitude, the time period, and our increments. First of all, what is my amplitude? 2. Perfect. So the highest the graph goes is positive 2, right? The lowest the graph goes is negative 2. Start at 0. So my time period, in order to find the time period, you take 2 pi and divide it by your b value. So I have 2 pi divided by pi gives me what? 2. Okay, so in this case, your time period is 2. It goes from 0 to 2. It's okay to have a whole number. This actually makes your life a little easier. You don't even have to look at pi. How do we find our increments? We take the period and divide it into how many pieces? Perfect. So 2 over 4 equals what? 1/2. So how many spaces are in between each tick mark? 1/2. So I start at 0. My first tick mark is at 1/2. My second tick mark, what's 1/2 plus 1/2? 1 whole. Right? 2 over 2. Then I'm going to add another. What's 2 over 2 plus 1 over 2? 3 over 2. Good. Say I added another one to get to the next tick mark. What's 3 over 2 plus 1 over 2? 2. 4 over 2, which is 2. Perfect. You're just adding. That's it. Remember, when you add, you keep the denominator the same. So let's graph it. Where do I start since this is a sine curve? At 0. It's positive, so I go up to the positive amplitude. Then I come back to the x-axis. Then I go down to the negative amplitude. Then I go back to the x-axis. And that pattern would just keep continuing along. Everybody okay? All right, one more. Let's do number 4. Number 4. What does number 4 say? Y equals what? Ooh, there's a bunch of fractions here. 1/3 cosine 1/2 x. Okay. Get some sort of system, guys, so you do the same thing every time. I like to remind myself, this is cosine, so where am I starting? At the amplitude, okay? Remember that. What is your A value? 1/3. What is your B value? Okay? You've identified everything you need. Now it's real easy to find the stuff. Amplitude. What is my amplitude? How high and how low does this thing go? 1/3. Perfect. So if you draw your graph, this is 1/3. This is negative 1/3, right? Spread it out so you give yourself your room. So here's 0. So the time period that I'm talking about, I'll go left to right here. The time period. Remind yourself, time period is 2 pi divided by b. Okay, I've got to do a little math here. 2 pi divided by my b value is 1/2. It's a fraction, yeah? So what do I do here? I keep, change, flip. So what is my time period? 4 pi. How many circles is that? 2. Good. So who cares, guys? I know I'm starting at 0 and I'm ending at 4 pi. This actually makes your life easier. Because think about it. How do you find the increments? You take the time period and divide by what? 4. So your time period is 4 pi divided by 4. How much space is in between each tick mark? Just pi. So my first tick mark is 1 pi. When I add 1 pi plus 1 pi, what do I get? 2 pi. When I add 2 pi plus 1 pi, what do I get? 3 pi. When I add 3 pi plus 1 pi, what do I get? 4 pi. There you go. And now we graph. Do these get harder? Yes, next year they will. But you don't have to worry about it right now. We're not worried about phase shifts. We're not shifting left and right. We're not shifting up and down. We're just worried about finding the time period, finding the increments, and knowing what the shape of the graph looks like. Since this is a cosine curve, where does it start? At the amplitude or at x? At the amplitude, or at 0, I should say. It's positive, so I'm starting at the positive 1/3. If there was a negative in front of it, you would just start at the negative 1/3. But I go down to the x-axis, then to the negative amplitude, then back to the x-axis, then back to the positive amplitude. And what do? Connect the dots. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is it. It's not bad. It appears a lot harder than it is. This is not Algebra 2. This is pre-calc stuff. The end of Algebra 2 gets you ready to go into either pre-calc, college algebra, wherever you're going to the next section. After we do 9.4, we're going to take our test, and then we're going to do section 9.5. It's a little more of this stuff, and that'll be on your final. But after that, we don't have any more tests or quizzes. Sound good? All right.